back. I know some of the faces, but I don't know everyone. So for those of you who haven't heard about Matilda before, I'll try and cover the basics, but please ask me afterwards if I leave out important stuff that you want to know. That hymn, isn't that an amazing hymn? The end of it, when finally God has things the way he wants them. And I've been thinking an awful lot about this in the last couple of years, and there's one very simple image that helps me grasp it. And I don't know, you'll find it in Genesis, but you'll also find it at the very end of the Bible in Revelation 22, where it talks about the tree of life in the city of God. And it says, the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. And the tree is planted, it's kind of like a clonal tree. It's either side of the river. And you know what happens, leaves of trees, when they fall into a river? They get carried by the river. And the river carries those leaves that are for the healing of the nations out into all the world. And it gives me hope, because boy, did the nations ever need healing. Okay, is there anyone here from Zimbabwe? Hey, good. Good to see you. Anyone else? Yeah, great. Salibonani. I finally got to go back to Zimbabwe in August and travelled with 3 others. And I put this slide up to remind me, because I think the last time I came to MCC, I was so busy telling you about the Matilda Project and Zimbabwe that I forgot to say thanks for all that MCC have done and do for Matilda. And I mean, you've been extremely generous to Matilda, which is wonderful, but the thing actually that I value very highly is that you pray for Zimbabwe and you pray for the Matilda Project. And who knows the value of that, but it's of great value in the eyes of the Lord. So thank you. I'm going to be showing lots of photographs of people that we talked to in villages, in rural areas, in southwest Zimbabwe, in Matobo district. But I just wanted to show you another side of Zim for a moment. This is called the Kami ruins, and there's no mortar in that wall. The person at the bottom of the wall is Willard, my colleague for 24 years. And that's just built with loose stone. Isn't that incredible? And the patterns in the stone and the different colours of stone as you go up. Anyway, it's just to show you something else about Zimbabwe. I love it. Okay. Great, it works. Thank you. One of the main things that the Matilda Project does is that it provides food packs every month for quite a lot of children. HIV has had a ridiculously huge impact in Zimbabwe, as it has in much of southern Africa and East Africa and other places. And there are a lot of children who have lost both parents. There's 93 that we give a food pack to every month. There's also 67 youngsters under the age of 18 who are HIV positive because of mother-to-child transmission of the virus, which means that they became HIV positive at their birth or when they were being breastfed, or both. And then there's a lot of children in the bracket that's called other vulnerable children. So these may be kids who have one parent alive who's sick, or they may have a parent or 2 parents with a disability or a mental illness or some reason that they're not able to work. Often parents have emigrated for work and left children in the care of grandparents who do a very good job of loving them but aren't able to plough, so they can't grow their own food. So there's all kinds of reasons why a child can be vulnerable. Vulnerable generally means that they don't have enough to eat, which is why we give them food packs. So this is at a food pack distribution. at late August, and the kids are carrying their food home. Sometimes the guardian is there and helps to carry it. So on your right, hopefully, I'll get myself all mixed up with left and right now in a minute, that's the inside of the plastic bag shows what goes with the food pack. On the girls' heads is 10 kilos of mealie meal, that's ground maize meal, which is the staple. And then there's a bottle of cooking oil, a bag of sugar, a bag of salt, a bag of soya beans, which is a protein source that's used as a kind of a sauce to have with your mealie meal, and a big bar of green soap. Green soap, you would think is not important. Green soap is vital, because that bar of hard soap is for washing clothes, washing yourself, cleaning the house, anything that you need to wash, you wash with your hard soap, and it's great stuff. That little one in the yellow, her name is Martha, and she's about 12, and she was going to carry 10 kilos of a heavy sack on her head the whole way home. It's kind of amazing, but if you get used to it, you can do it. In a way, I feel more sorry for some of the grandmothers, the go-go's, who are carrying food home for grandchildren that they're looking after, because they might have the aches and pains that you get used to when you start getting older, but they still carry the stuff home. Sarah, who came with us, talked to a lot of the mothers and grandmothers and guardians and carers of the kids, and got some great stories that I'm going to share a couple of them with you. Okay, you're not going to be able to see. Are you going to be able to read that? Okay. So the lady in the yellow shirt is a grandmother called Betty. She's 63. And the little boy, Nungisi, is 11, and he lives in her care. He has HIV, and I want you to remember this because we're coming back to it later. That's the important thing I want you to know about them. He gets a food pack every month because he's HIV positive. If you're HIV positive, you need more, as a youngster, you need more nourishment than a child without HIV, which is why we give those children a food pack every month, so that they can take their medication and be as healthy as possible. The girl on the right is Tubulichle, and she's now 18. She is a double orphan, and we've paid her school fees and given her a food pack every month for several years. She's a lovely kid, and she lives with her younger brother, Farai, who has no interest in going to school. All he wants to do is build, build, build. So you'll see what options are available to him in a minute. This classroom is in the Youth Skills Centre that Willard started years ago. It started with a class for girls in dressmaking, but it's now expanded a bit, as you'll see in a moment. The woman in the white jacket, or whatever colour it is, grey jacket, is called Patience, and she's the dressmaking trainer. And she has a class of girls that she's teaching dress design, and they're able to get work when they graduate after 18 months training, which is wonderful, because the school leavers in the villages really have no opportunity for work, which is why Willard wanted to give them skills, because the last lot who graduated at the end of last year, several of them have got work in town now. And then Tokozani, the man on your left, is the carpentry trainer, and he's been training a gang of school leavers, boys again, who had no employment opportunity. Willard is in the white shirt. So the boys were working on pieces for their final exam in the course, and they were busy putting in hard graft. The wonderful thing is that they can sell stuff, and people walk past and go, how much are you selling that cabinet for, or how much is that bed base, or how much is that table, or whatever, and they're able to sell them, which, I mean, if somebody gets $25, that's enough to buy enough food basically to feed a good few people for maybe a month. So another exam piece, but the girl on the right is called Praise, and she was working with great concentration on her exam piece as well, and she's one of the ones who's got work now in town. Her mum is a leader in home-based care. Come back to her. So all the girls had stuff hanging up on the wall that they'd made. This was the girls who'd completed 18 months, and some of the things they'd made are beautiful. Now, on the other side, on the right-hand side, is a trainer called Sipo. And she was a volunteer at that time, but she's now joined the training team. And she was teaching hairdressing skills, which again is really popular. And you can get a bit of work in doing someone's hair. And the clothes behind her are not so beautiful because they're the second group of girls who had just started. So they were their early pieces. Sipo's wonderful. She belongs to the same church as Willard up in town, and she is just full of life and joy and interest in helping. Now, that didn't change. Do I need to point it at Anthony? Oh, there we are. Great. Thank you. I'll go back one. Great. Yeah. Okay. So that's the Youth Skills Training Centre. I maybe should go back for 1 sec because I want to tell you how it works. At 8 o'clock every morning when the students arrive, the girls live on site but the boys arrive, and there's devotions every morning at 8 o'clock. And there's also a choir for the Youth Skills Centre students. So the boys and girls get to sing together, and Willard sometimes brings them up to the church he is pastoring in town for them to sing, and they love singing. And then Saturday evenings, there's a Bible study. So they're learning skills for employment. The girls are living on site and are being mentored by Beauty. Beauty is in the dark blue polo shirt with the orange logo on it in the slightly to the right of that photo. And she works with Willard for years. But she's there keeping an eye on the girls and mentoring them. And they're growing as young women, they're growing in skills, they're growing in faith. And their villages are coming back and saying, thank you. And they were girls when they went to you, and now they're coming back as responsible members of the community, and we're very grateful, which is really good to hear. So this is at a homestead, and the grandmother is on the far left, and she's responsible for a gang of children. Some are orphans and some may not be. But Martha, again, is standing in front of my son there beside Willard in the middle. And the two little ones between the grandmother and Martha are sisters of Martha. This woman is a very old friend of mine. Her name is Modesta. I've known her for 20 years. She's extraordinary. She's in her late 70s, and she's still the home-based care coordinator for her village. And she'd recently had a cataract operation and was struggling because the sunlight was hurting her eyes. So Sarah whipped off her sunglasses and gave them to her, and Modesta was chuffed with the sunglasses. And anytime we saw her afterwards, Sarah said to her, "You're like a film star, Modesta," and she's going, "Thanks." But she knows every child in her village who's HIV positive. She knows all the orphans. She knows every patient in the village. And she's looking out for all of them all the time and coordinating the work. She has a younger secretary that helps her. All the coordinators have a secretary now because a number of them are getting old and there needs to be somebody ready to replace them. And we'll come back to one of the interesting things that the coordinators and secretaries do in a moment. But that's in Modesta's home. She invited us in and she gave us a snack and we sat and had a chat. Very happy to see each other. Okay, this is the kind of family now that the food packs are for. Judge Chua, the old man sitting down, is in his 90s and his wife is in her 80s. And they're responsible for all those children. All of them are grandchildren except for the little boy at Madushwa's knee, who's a great-grandchild. And there are a couple of them have a parent alive, but none of the parents are living there. They've gone away for work. So these two, who are too old to be in charge of that many kids, they don't have an income. They don't have anything to feed them on. And you have to pay school fees in Zimbabwe. You can't go to school for free. So he's been sending the children to school, even though he couldn't pay the fees. But when a child is supposed to finish primary school, if their fees haven't been paid, the school won't release their results, so they can't go to secondary school, because they have to be able to produce their results to get into secondary school. So we've been paying a couple of the children's fees, and somebody offered to pay his debt so that the ones who are about to finish primary can go on and move into secondary school. And the girl in the yellow hat, again in front of my son at the back, is going to come to the Youth Skills Centre and learn dress design, which is great. That family, they have a latrine, a pit latrine, but it was becoming dangerous and at risk of collapse. So again, somebody has offered to build them a new one, which will cost about $500. It's quite a deal, because you have to have a concrete base and cover it and stuff. So they're going to have a safe toilet again, which is great. So that's the little boy who's the great-grandson and another of the grandchildren. And Madushwa, the grandfather, was a volunteer himself, a home-based care volunteer for many years. So this little one, gorgeous little child, Sipesile, and she's living with HIV in the care of her grandmother. They don't know if her mother's alive or not. Her mother went away for work and hasn't come back. But do you see what the little child is wearing? That's a baby grow, a popper that would pop under a baby. But beautiful little child, and she looks reasonably well and strong, which is great. She's another one who gets a food pack. Okay, here's another old friend. Those of you who've seen Matilda photographs before may remember Bradley. Bradley was one of triplets. He was the one who survived, but he survived with cerebral palsy. So he's now, did I put 21 on that? 23, okay, wow. I first met him in 2009. And he has one good hand, and he can write with the one good hand, which is wonderful. But he's survived longer than he would be expected to have life expectancy in rural Zimbabwe. He's a great character. And we were very pleased to see each other, as you can see. His grandfather takes care of him, but his grandfather's really quite old. And there's only the two of them on the homestead, and it's quite frightening thinking of what's going to happen if his grandfather, Stanley, passes away, has a heart attack, has a stroke, something, because Bradley can't do anything. He only has the use of one arm. Anyway, people walk by and they'd hear him calling. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. Okay, this child's name means we trust in God. Sitembi Nkosi, who's 6. Another double orphan, lives with her grandmother, who's got a big goiter on the side of her neck, and that was their home. It doesn't even have a fence. If you live in the rural areas, you need a fence around your homestead because it keeps out. It discourages baboons, it keeps out leopards. It's an area where there are leopards. It's easier to keep your compound safe if you've got a fence, but she doesn't. They said that this little one, Sitembi Nkosi, is always in trouble in school because she bullies the other children and she can't behave and she doesn't sit still. And those of you who are teachers, you understand the problem. And her grandmother, I think, is the same. She's full of energy and giddy. But a gorgeous little child, and again, someone who gets a food pack. And the next slide. Thank you. Okay, so this is another thing that we're able to do. As well as paying school fees for some of these kids and getting the food pack every month, we've been able a few times to drill a borehole. And this one supplies one of the primary schools which didn't have water. It's a real advantage for a primary school to have water. It means the kids can have something to drink. It means they can wash their hands. It means that the teachers live on site. They don't travel to school every day because that's not the way the system works. They live beside the school and they now have water for their homes and to do laundry and stuff. And because the pump is solar powered, they make the water available for a couple of hours a day to the villagers who live close by who can come and get water. People don't have running water in homes at all. Unless you happen to be really rich and can drill your own borehole. But that means somebody's working in South Africa and sending home a significant amount of money to do that. Right, and the next one. Thank you. Okay. This is another two little characters collecting their food packs. And the family on the right, again, this is a family I've known for a long time, but Fanuel wasn't there. The last couple of times I've met Lynette, he'd left her and gone off with someone else, and for whatever reason, he's now back. And they actually look quite happy now, which is wonderful. When I met Lynette in 2007, she was dying of AIDS. And I honestly thought she wouldn't last long. And she got antiretrovirals, and they worked. They had the Lazarus effect, as it's called. And she pulled through, she recovered from AIDS, and the virus was brought under control, and her viral load was brought way down, and she's now able to live quite healthily. She's still as thin as a stork, but she's healthy. And when they got back together, they had another child, the little one in the pink top, and her name means God's gift. And then they have a grandson living with them as well. They're absolutely destitute, the poor. They have nothing. When we were there, everyone talked about the water situation because they'd had drought for the whole year. They'd had no rains, really, effectively. He walks 2.5 kilometres to the river to fill up a kind of a drum with water and bring it back for the homestead. And that was what people were doing. When I say river, you think water. No, there isn't any. The river is dry. It's a sand river. You dig down until you get to the water level down in the river, and then you scoop with a can to get the water up. But that was in August. The rain started usually the rains are supposed to start in October. They started in January, and it's been raining pretty much ever since. And now all the rivers are full and flooded. And a lot of people have lovely maize crops growing. Some people, there's been so much water that there's water damage. Some of the maize plants are waterlogged and starting to rot. But a lot of people have a decent crop this year, which is really good news. Okay, I've been talking about volunteers and coordinators, and we had a great meeting with the volunteers and the coordinators at one of the primary schools. And we all had a meal together, which Beauty and the others cooked and brought in tubs, containers. I'm not going to name them all to you. You don't need to know their names. But these are they're absolutely wonderful people. They're chosen by their community, by the community heads, village heads, development committee, and they're vetted by the leaders of each village to be coordinators, because the people that they're looking after are the most vulnerable in the village. They're the ones who are sick, the ones who have lost their parents, who are the most easily exploited, and that's why they're charged with looking after them. If you get the Matilda news, some of you may do. If you would like it, I send out a news email every month, and if you'd like to get it, you're more than welcome. Come and talk to me afterwards, or email me at matildaproject@gmail.com, and I'll add you to the mailing list. But one and another has challenges. Andy, the man on the right, has been very ill, and Vivian, the man next to him, has a kidney condition, and he hasn't been well for a long time. He also lives with HIV and is a great example to his community. They're treasures. They're just absolutely treasures, the salt of the earth, and they give of themselves to their communities and to the children in their communities. They sing, they dance, they came dancing to greet us, and of course, I don't know if you know this, but speeches are really important in Zimbabwe. So I had to address the group, and then there was an address back, and that's the way it works. So I got Willard to translate for me, because I have a few words of Ndebele, but only a few. And we read a passage from 2 Corinthians chapter 4 about the punchline at the end is having nothing and yet possessing everything. And that's how these people feel to me. They don't have anything that looks like wealth, but they have so much. They are people who care, they're people who have joy, they're people who have community, they're people who have solidarity, and they've got so much going for them. Yeah, amazing. And one of the things that they do is that they keep registers, and they've been doing this for a very long time. So the orange line is the stronger, the ochre kind of colour, burnt orange, shows you the number of double orphans. And from 2014, that number has been falling. The reason it's been falling is because parents who were HIV positive got antiretroviral medication, so they didn't die anymore. So they were able to are alive to raise their children, and the number of double orphans has gone down, 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 which is absolutely wonderful. It's below 100 now from 250. And the trajectory is down. The double orphans are in the older, they're kind of 10 and up mostly. The yellowy line is children living with HIV. That's not dropping as fast, but they've been largely healthy because of antiretroviral medication. The green line is vulnerable children, and that's a worry because the number of vulnerable children continues to be very high. COVID didn't help with that, but the Zimbabwe situation the economy in Zimbabwe is a disaster. For those of you who know about it, inflation is shocking. The price of food it's just not affordable for the very poor. People can't buy food. So that's why more children are becoming vulnerable. But this is all from the stats that the coordinators and their secretaries keep. And they meet in January or February every year and combine all the stats and send me figures, and then I draw, actually, some software thing or other draws me a lovely graph. Okay, I'm responsible for that reading that Tony read, which was a very, very odd reading indeed, I'm sure you thought. The reason I wanted us to listen to that message from the prophet Jeremiah is because of what's been happening in the past week, the past couple of months. And that is that funding from the US for UNAIDS, which is the main organisation in the world that helps to combat HIV, in HIV prevention and in the treatment of HIV. The US has stopped funding UNAIDS. The US has also cut 90% plus of all of its development and relief projects. And this has already been seen in Zimbabwe. The impact has already been seen. The terrifying thing is that the supply of antiretrovirals is going to dry up. And that means every child I've shown you and every adult I've shown you who's HIV positive is going to die unless we can source an alternative way of getting antiretrovirals to those children and the adults. And it doesn't take long if you're not well nourished to become sick with AIDS when you're HIV positive and your viral load is starting to shoot up again. There's TB, and the TB programs have been cut. So if people become sick again with TB, they don't have immunity to fight it if their viral load is shooting up. And there's going to be complex illnesses. A common cold is enough to make someone really sick. I've spent 24 years working on this project, and I've watched children grow up to be adults who were born with HIV, and they're now fully functioning adults. And the thoughts of every one of those dying because of cuts makes me turn to the prophets. And when I turn to the prophets, that's the kind of thing I find. And if you're in despair about the world, I strongly recommend that you turn to the prophets and read them. If you don't know where to start, the prophets are a bit wacky and it's a bit hard to know where to start with them. If you want an easy place to start at Isaiah chapter 56 and read the next 3 or 4 chapters. Yes, 4 chapters of Isaiah, and it'll give you a start on the prophets. The prophets are full of talk about justice and about defending people and about looking after foreigners and widows and orphans. And it's just important to read it. So I'm going to come back to the very last bit of that passage that Tony read. Jeremiah was bringing a message from God to a king. And he said, does it make you a king to have more and more cedar? Does your kingship depend on getting more? Did not your father have food and drink? He did what was right and just, so all went well with him. He defended the cause of the poor and needy, and so all went well. And here's the punchline. Is that not what it means to know me, says the Lord. He defended the cause of the poor and needy, and so all went well. Is that not what it means to know me, says the Lord? So, from the earlier part of that passage, but from countless passages in Jeremiah, in Isaiah, in Ezekiel, in the smaller prophets, Micah, they all have the same message. The Lord cares about the oppressed. He cares about the poor. He cares about the orphan. He cares about the widow. The ones who can't defend themselves, the Lord cares about them. And he wants us to do the same. And when you see that, when you see the opposite of that happening, we as people who identify with Jesus, it's part of our task is to say, this is not right. It's not right to suddenly cut antiretroviral medication for millions of people whose lives depend on it. That's not right. If you want to phase it out and make a plan, grand. But to suddenly stop it so there's no plan. Can you imagine what the Lord is thinking? And if I'm affected by it, and I'm heartbroken for the thoughts of those kids who are going to be lost if we can't sort it out in some way of getting it to them. It's not easy because this medication is prescription medication and it needs to be monitored. You can't just walk into a shop and buy a packet of Panadol. It's not like that. So it's not easy to replace a supply just like that. And this is what the Lord says: do what is just and right. Rescue from the hand of the oppressor the one who has been robbed. Do no wrong or violence to the foreigner, the fatherless or the widow, and do not shed innocent blood in this place. Okay, so our call is not simply to care about people, it's also to defend them in every way that we can. And the prophets, you'll find that if you start reading the prophets more and more. And even the psalm, Kathy, is it? That psalm that you read this morning talked about justice as well. You'll find it everywhere. And